What's up, guys? Welcome back to the 9 C's of Reality, an apologetic for God's kingship. I'm your host, Caleb Callahan, and you have just tuned into Catastrophe 101. Okay, Catastrophe 101. What are we covering in Catastrophe? The third C of the 9 C's. Well, first of all, it's Genesis 4 through 9. So if you haven't read Genesis 4 through 9, I would highly encourage that. It's going to be very helpful if you'll go read that to understand and be able to follow along with what I'm talking about. The reason is in the 9 C's, especially the 101s, remember we're staying 30,000 feet above, and then in the 102s and the 103s, we'll start to dive into more specific detail in the scriptures. The author is Moses, and the audience is still the exile community. It's going to be that way for a very long time, okay? I put the future condensed here in notes, and there's a reason for that. I'm going to show you how, no doubt, this was a real event in history, but also how it's also a condensed version of what is to come. So just keep in mind, we're going to talk about in the 102s and 103s, the fallen angels, the Nephilim, the Christology and the flood. Why would God destroy the earth? Questions like that. Like, what was God up to in this? You know, people living these really long lives. Like, what was that about? And the earth's atmosphere and what it must have been like to be able to sustain these kind of long ages of man. We're going to talk about all that and more, but that's not going to be a 101. And the reason is because, man, honestly, you start to read Genesis 1 through 11 and you just get kind of awestruck by it. You're like, man, this world was so different than the world that we live in today. Like, what do I do with that? It's like watching the Sci-Fi Network. And sometimes it causes us to take some steps back and go, okay, this can't be real. This must be myth. But remember what I always say, okay? And I always try to put this up front, okay? All stories about the origin of the world are fantastic. All of them. All of them are fantastic. Does it make sense to you that everything that we see today, all the complexity in life, all the intelligence that we see came from nothing? That nothing produced everything? That nothing produced chemical soup that was ultimately struck by lightning, and now here we are today and all the complexity that we see around us? No, that makes absolutely no sense, and that is extremely fantastic. More so fantastic than Genesis 1 through 11. So just keep that in mind, okay? You got to keep that in mind. If you're going to reject this story, give me a better story. So we're going to get into all that more in the 102s and the 103s, so I hope you hang around and you keep following along with us. But today, the basics that you need to understand about catastrophe is this. Number one, the legacy of Cain, right? We need to see how one man's sin ultimately corrupted his entire line, right? All the generations past him. That is a very good lesson for us to learn, that the sins of the father will be passed down to the sons and the sons' sons and the sons' sons' sons. And I could keep on going with that, but I'm not going to. And also just how when God stepped back and allowed man to play God the way that Adam did when he took of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. When he took that tree, remember, he was saying, I am going to define that which is good and evil, that which is right and wrong. And because he did that, this is what has happened in the world. We have all the brokenness, all the corruption, because it is not man's place to play God. And we see this in Cain, right? We see Cain desiring to play God himself. He wants God to leave him alone. He wants to be free to go do life the way that he wants to do it. And God sets him free to do that. And we see the world spiral out of control in a hurry. But then we also need to pick up on the theme of God finding favor in Noah. Not because Noah was perfect. Noah wasn't perfect by a long shot, right? He gets off the ark, and we're going to see later, he gets drunk, right? Immediately, he gets drunk and is laying there naked and ashamed. So it's not because he's perfect. That's not what it means to walk with God. Perfection, if you could achieve perfection, then we wouldn't need Jesus, right? We wouldn't need Jesus. Okay? Also another theme, guys, I want you to see in this, because it's going to happen a lot in the Bible. We see this theme of warning, right? God is warning people. He is merciful to warn people. And then you see this mercy in his allowance of patience, right? Here, he took 120 years to build the ark, and I'm guessing that Noah was probably the first evangelist where he was telling people, I'm building an ark and the rain is going to come, and people are like, rain? What are you talking about, rain? What is rain? Because it had never rained before, right? So something the people had never seen was coming to judge them. God was going to use that, right? And they laughed at Noah because they had never seen it before. That's important. That's important. But we see the warning and the mercy and the patience of God, but then we also see the faithfulness of God to carry out judgment, to carry out his faithful judgment and his good justice. And in all this, guys, we see a kind of telling of the future, right? Because what's going to happen one day? One day, God is going to return again, and the wrath of God is going to be poured out on this earth one more time. God's justice is coming. He's coming to enact justice, and all those who look upon the cross of Jesus Christ and trust in the blood of Christ to redeem them are going to be rescued in the same way as all those who walked upon and got upon the ark were rescued. So we have this kind of telling of the future, of what is to come, right here in the chapters 4 through 9 in the very beginning of the Bible. And then finally, it's all wrapped up with the covenant made to Noah, right? And there's some clear things. And then finally, it's all wrapped up with the covenant that's made to Noah. And there's some distinctions that we need to see in this covenant, okay, that are very important. And we're going to talk more about this in the future, but I just want to lay these out for you as we wrap up Catastrophe. Number one, you see A over here. It's not the first covenant, right? You had Adam's covenant, but it's the first one that's clearly defined in Scripture, okay? It's also made with all of creation, which is unlike all the rest, right? This is the only covenant in the Bible that's made with all of creation. And it's kind of a remaking of the original obligations and privileges and callings that God gave to Adam, right? So it's almost like a restart for the world, right? It's almost like a restart. Like everything is starting over. And then we also see that there's no salvation promised in this covenant, right? Rather, this is a covenant of common grace. So what is common grace? Common grace is God's restraining of evil on the world, right? It's that grace and mercy also is given unto the wicked as well as the righteous, right? So you have this common grace of God that is placed upon the world, and it exists still today, and it's restraining evil, because if it wasn't there, it could be a lot more evil than it is. And then the grace of God, the saving grace of God, is that which provides salvation. So this is more of a common grace covenant. And then finally, like all promises from God and all covenants from God, they're marked with a sign, and the sign of this covenant was the rainbow. And that is where we are at the end of Catastrophe.